Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. I am Abram Kielsmeyer-Jones, and this is Hebrew Lexicons, Grammars, and Reading Aids. You can consider this a companion webinar to the one we had last week, which was Greek Lexicons, Grammars, and Reading Aids. We'll look at those same three categories. Of course, the resources are different, but same idea is that we're going to look at resources that can help us with words, word studies, grammar, and then some particular aids for reading the text as a whole. I, in this session, am assuming that you've had a semester or two of biblical Hebrew and want to go even deeper in learning the language, whether that's correct or not. What we're looking at, you'll probably benefit more from if you've had some Hebrew already. I will demo some of these resources that are here in the handout, and that handout is available to you in the GoToWebinar control panel. There's a handout section. Just click on the triangle if you don't already see the handout to make sure the triangle is pointed down. That will reveal a PDF which you can click and open and save and follow along. We're also recording today, so you who are here live will receive a recording sometime later today and an attachment with the handout as well. If you're watching on a recording, you can email me, abramkj@accordancebible.com, for the handout, and I'd be happy to pass it on to you. If you have any questions or comments at any time, you can put them in the questions box. It's a one-way typed chat that comes to me. I'll either respond privately or anonymously share your comment or question with the group and respond to everyone. We should have time for lots of questions today. I'll check every so often, but anytime you have a question, just type it into the questions box. All right, well, let's start with lexicons. Hebrew lexicons is the first place that we're gonna go. And I'm gonna talk about a few different resources, three in particular, and then I'm gonna talk about how to use them. So the how to use them part will apply to all of the lexicons, but let's start with Halot, the Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament. Again, everything here in the handout is hyperlinked to where you can find it in the store. But to open this lexicon by itself, which is what we'll do first, just go to your library. So make sure the library pane is showing, and you can type it in by abbreviation. I suppose you could type in Hebrew lexicon, and that will bring it up as well. But however you want to get there, just double click and that will open. It will open to your most recently opened place. So I'm looking at some entry, mid-entry here that I last looked up. But now you've got the lexicon open. And there are a couple ways to think about interacting with this from the time that you open it. One is browsing through it, which I know we don't really think about browsing through dictionaries, but if you think about using a print dictionary, when you look up a word, you are turning pages and looking at them to find the target word you're trying to find. So you do end up doing a little bit of browsing. Maybe a word catches your eye. That's one actual real advantage, I think, to a print lexicon over a digital one. But you can browse through the entries the same way here in Accordance. This is the content sidebar. So clicking that toggles that open. And you can see it's organized alphabetically as we would expect. Together with prefaces for different volumes. And all of these letters you can expand and collapse. So if you wanted to look for words that started with Lamed, you would just expand that and you could scroll through and browse your way through different entries, single clicking on each one, or even I'm pressing the down key now, just advance entry by entry. And you can also browse by scrolling whether it's on your mouse or your trackpad or whatever it is you have, you can scroll through the text as well. So that's as it would be with a PDF. I mean, you can do that in Accordance, pretty simple. More efficient will be actually looking up your entry. So this is the search entry area, and you'll notice here it's set to Hebrew entry right now. That says choose the field to search. And fields in Accordance, there are different ways that Accordance tag words and headings, and you can see what the fields are in Halot. They'll be very similar in other lexicons. It may vary from tool tool, but you've got a Hebrew entry, an Aramaic entry, that's the A in Halot. You've got English titles, so that would be anything that's a heading basically. English gloss, that would be a translation equivalent. English content, that would be the full body Hebrew and Aramaic content. So if you wanted to search, for example, a Hebrew word, not in its entry, but where it occurs with other words. So maybe you're looking up Hesed and you want to see the entry, but you also want to see, are there other words that it's associated with? You would search Hebrew Aramaic content. And there are more search fields here. This is worth taking some time just to try out. Scripture is one I find myself using often. I might toggle to scripture, and if I'm reading through Genesis 12, maybe I'll type in Genesis 12 and I've got 110 hits. You can make that more exact so it doesn't have the range by doing an equal sign. So I'm going to do equal Genesis 12. That's still 108 hits. Maybe I've got a particular verse in mind. 6 hits there, and you'll see them here as hyperlinks. So that's the scripture search, which is one I use often, but Hebrew entry, again, is probably the main one that you'll use. So you may type in your word, whatever it is. Maybe I type in ahav for love. And there is a little bit of a learning curve with the keyboard here for typing. There's not a one-to-one correspondence, of course, between a US keyboard and the Hebrew letters. So there is a little bit of a learning curve there, but a good shortcut for that is this characters tool here. You can enter in your letters that way. So let's just take a Hav. A is Aleph, that's easy enough. H is Het, and B is Beit. So that one worked out. That actually did have a one-to-one correspondence, but some other ones don't. And you can see them all here in the characters. You can enter them by selecting the character, but if you hover over the character, you can also see what the corresponding English or US keyboard letter is. So here's the Hebrew letter Het, and you've got J for that on the US keyboard. Here's, let's see, you've got Yod, that's Y, there's Kaf, that's K. Like I said, some of these, Lamed, L, Mem, M, some of these will be pretty intuitive, but others not, like IN requires an O. So if you want to, and I know some users have used enough Hebrew in accordance that they have that memorized. I have had points where I was doing lots of Hebrew research all at one time, and I had it pretty well down what the characters were, how they corresponded. But if you ever forget, just go to the characters icon there in your toolbar. And if you don't see that in your toolbar, you can go to right click and customize toolbar. And it's a little bit different on Windows. I'm on Mac, but there's a characters icon here that you would just drag and drop into your toolbar so that it's showing. But I've got that there, characters, and again, it will not only show you the correspondence if you want to go ahead and learn it, but you can also just type it in as you need to. All right, so that's a little side note there, and it's Greek has a little bit of a learning curve on that, but not nearly as much. So I wanted to spend more time on that today. But once you've searched a word by entry, it will take you to the entry. It will also advance you to the spot in the content sidebar that corresponds to your entry. So if I go down, I'll see that Ahav is highlighted here in my content sidebar. This is going to be a pretty long entry, in part because it's Halot, and it's a 5-volume lexicon. It's very long, and also in part because this word is used a lot. You'll note that it's got stem-specific entries. So in the call stem, you start with the translation equivalent or a gloss to like, to love. So if I just wanted to learn it as a vocabulary word, what's a quick gloss I can remember? Or if I'm doing a provisional translation, how do I initially translate this? But then you've got fuller definitions after that. So more specifically, love of a person. And then some examples. Father loves his son. There's a scripture reference. So if you had searched Genesis 22:2, that would have come up this way. I hover over it. I see it in my instant details. I can also click it open. Now that's clicking it open in English. I can see the word love there, but hovering over that word, because it's a Strong's number text, shows me indeed that that is ahav. And you could open up a parallel Hebrew here as well. There's lots of ways to get in and out of all of this information, but maybe the quickest way is just a hover or even a click and hold if you want to read the verse. Usually you'll be able to see in English, you'll be able to backwards translate and be able to tell where the Hebrew is, but it's also good to go from this hyperlink straight into the Hebrew, either by changing your settings. You can have your Hebrew be what shows up here in the instant details, or you can open up the English and then do a Hebrew in parallel. So a long entry here, the stem, the translation equivalent or the gloss, the definition, and you can see here that it could be love of a person. It could be, where's number 2, a thing. You could love a thing like justice or bribery, sort of the opposite loves there. Love of God, God's love, love doing something, and then different stems. So in the nifal participle in particular, you've got lovable, and the PL, PLL, and the HIFAL. And so that's actually not that long of an entry, but it will give you STEM-specific definitions. And you can expect that with all of your Hebrew lexicons, because as the stem changes around the root, the nuance of the word, the meaning can change as well. So that's Halot, that's opening it up on its own, that's browsing through the content sidebar and then using the search entry area. We just did the one entry, but again, if you thought of a particular word, so let's go back to chesed, and I think about, let me type H, well, no, that's not, it's not hey, it's chet that I want. So let me go back to that character palette, and there's my letter. So there's a J, and I want an S or a Samic and a Dalet, and that's a D, so that was easy enough. But you may find yourself using the character palette more often than not to get to the letters that you want. Notice too that you're gonna have some, and this is just kind of how Hebrew works, but I typed in these 3 consonants and I got 6 exact hits, and that's because you've got different meanings with the same triconsonantal root here. But it didn't take me very long to get to chesed pointed this way, which is now here's my entry around faithfulness or goodness or graciousness or something like that. Let me show you one other feature of these lexicons. I may wonder, for example, about chesed as something like loving kindness. And I may look at this entry, which is not that long, but it's long enough and it's a lot of words. And I may wonder, am I remembering that right? Is love really part of it? You can use this plus button here, and you can nest a search within a search. So right now what I've done is I've searched for this Hebrew entry of chesed. Again, this gave me different options, but I got to the one I wanted. And now what I can do is search the English content for the word. Let's say I was wondering about love, and let me just do LOV with an asterisk. That's a wild card that tells Accordance to find love, or it tells Accordance to find any word that begins with LOV. So love, loving, lovable. And in fact, I've got 4 hits, and that counts. This is 1 hit and this is another. So here's 1, there's 2, so lovely. There's my 3rd hit, chesed, that's the entry I was looking for. And here's the word lovely. This kind of search, I think, happens Well, I use it when I'm trying to jog my memory about a word, or maybe I thought a word meant something or had a nuance, or I just want to look it up and don't want to scroll through and read through this whole entry. You can nest searches this way. In fact, you could even add more. If you wanted to see a particular Hebrew entry, let's go back to Achav, and let's stay with love there. But let's also see if we can add a scripture reference, Genesis. All right, so this is gonna show me the entry for Achav and all of the English content in that entry with LOV asterisk and a reference to Genesis. And so there it is. It's all showing here if I wanted to see both of those things. So you can have some fun with this plus button, but on the one hand, this is simple and easy enough once you sort of get the hang of the characters palette, but you can search by Hebrew entry. But on the other hand, this plus button allows you to do some really interesting nested searches. So again, I would just encourage spending some time with this search entry area. It may simply be that with the lexicon, 9 times out of 10, you're using Hebrew entry, or maybe Hebrew entry or scripture. But there may be a case where you're looking for a Greek, you're doing some work in the Septuagint, and you just want to see what Greek content is in Halot. There's a search field for that as well. Let me just pause there. There's some other lexicons that we can look at, and we're kind of already working our way into this second section of lexicons, but let me pause and see if you've got comments or questions on anything that we've covered so far. Oh, here's a question. Do the characters do Greek as well? Yes, they do. You need to change that here in the drop-down menu. But there they are. And these ones are, like I said, there's a little bit more correspondence here. But like theta, I mean, there's no one TH letter in English, so that's Q. So again, you either have to learn that or come back to this. But and then if you're using the character palette a lot, so Yehudit is what we want for Hebrew. That's the name of the font. If you're using the character palette a lot, you can, I mean, you can just toggle it open, but you can also pop it out and leave it open. And then when you're done, you can close it. But you can just kind of move it over to where you want it. And then if you're doing a lot of word studies, I would just leave this open. There's more advanced searching you can do that we won't get into today, but that has to do with vowels and pointing and all of that. There's a really good in the help files in accordance under Hebrew searching, and we've done webinars on this too. But there's a really good kind of 101 explainer on Hebrew searches. And if you just go to help, once you're in accordance and go to accordance help, it will open up the help files that are native to whatever platform you're using and whatever version. I'm using Accordance 13 on a Mac, so it opened up to Accordance 13 help files on a Mac. And you've got this section here on Hebrew searches. You could also go to help and webinars, and we've done some webinars on Hebrew searching. So it does get more involved and takes some learning, but you might even just start with the characters and see about getting those under your belt, and you can use that for the Hebrew entry. Now, of course, you may be coming to the lexicon not by itself. You may be coming to the lexicon from the text, the biblical text, and we'll talk about that in just a moment as well. How would you do that? Because we may not just be opening up the lexicons. Maybe you're reading through some text and want to look up a word. I'll show you that in just a moment. Somebody said, are there some features not available in the mobile app? Yes, quite a few. I'm trying to think of where the best place for that is. Somewhere on the Accordance website is a set of the release notes. I don't know if anyone's done a comprehensive list of the disparities, but the searching that we're doing, you ought to be able to do. And of course, on mobile, it's a little different because you can actually change very quickly. You can toggle your mobile keyboard between languages. But I would, there are help files within the mobile app too, so I would start there to learn more about that. Somebody asks, is BDB as good as Halot? I think the general consensus on this is no, although, I mean, it's a subjective question in a sense, but BDB is an older lexicon, and so it wouldn't include some kind of recent advances in lexicography. It's cheaper. I think it's in the public domain too. If you want to find it online, there's an abridged and a complete version. Yeah, I think the general consensus, at least among scholarly types, would be that Halot is more reliable, more up to date. I wouldn't say don't use BDB, especially, I mean, Halot is potentially cost prohibitive. So if you've got BDB, then start with that. But yeah, I mean, this one just doesn't quite have some of the up-to-date information that Halot does. So that's the short answer. That question probably deserves a longer answer. Another lexicon is the Concise Dictionary of Classical Hebrew, and I mentioned this because it is a, well, concise version of the Dictionary of Classical Hebrew. So there are these two options, and again, I mean, as a longtime accordance user, you know, I'm mindful around purchase strategies. So Dictionary of Classical Hebrew is up there with Halot in terms of pricing. The concise one is more affordable and also very good. They've done a great job of abridging it. This is a good counterpart to Halot. It's got some differences. The primary difference being, you have to go up to the preface for this, but this covers, as the name suggests, classical Hebrew. So it is, biblical Hebrew will be the bulk of what it covers, and but the rest of it, I'm just trying to scroll down to find where this is. Ben Sirah, the Qumran manuscripts, Dead Sea Scrolls and related texts, and inscriptions and other occasional text. So it is a broader corpus of Hebrew that's covered than just what's in the Hebrew Bible. And they go into detail on that in the lexicon. And I think especially if you're studying some of these other texts, this would be one to consider. If you're just reading the Hebrew Bible and have Halot already, I'd say you're pretty well set. But it's always good to check a word in multiple lexicons. At any rate, this concise dictionary is a great abridgment, more affordable, shorter. And you can see here, like if we can just compare, if we go back to a Hav here, I mean, this is significantly shorter than what we saw in Halot. If we look at a Hav in that's the concise dictionary. Let's look at it in the full dictionary. So you've got, and see how similar this is to Halot even here. Love another human, love a deity, hyperlinked references, and then again, you've got the other manuscripts here. But this is a very long entry. This, I think, is longer than Halot in total. I'm not 100% sure about that, but this at least is a longer entry. But again, concise, you've just got it here. And they pack a lot in and use abbreviations, and all that is hyperlinked. So if you don't know what HI is, it's the Hiphil stem, IMPV, imperative. It's all hyperlinked along with the references. And this is a great starting point for a word study, and that may be sufficient. So that's the concise Dictionary of Classical Hebrew. I've hyperlinked there to that. The other one I wanted to show, and I'll just kind of briefly allude to this because I want to have us move into some other stuff, but the New International Dictionary of Old Testament Theology and Exegesis, even the abbreviation is long, NIDOT. I mention that because it is a lexicon, it's a dictionary, but it's a little bit more, well, here, let me just show you. You've still got what would look like a dictionary entry with different stems, maybe different spellings, things like that. But then you've got a more kind of sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph, written out article, you know, rather than abbreviations and you know, different numbers and entries. You've got a full-on article about a particular word. And so here, for example, here's how achav is used in the ancient Near East. So even before it was used in the Hebrew Bible, what did it mean? Because the Hebrew Bible was not written in a vacuum. It was written in a context and in a culture and with a language that people knew and that had evolved from other languages. So it will tell you about that. We'll talk about achav in the Old Testament. And again, similar to halat. So here's achav with God as the subject. But it is more, I mean, it's an alphabetical entry organized dictionary or lexicon, but it's more thematic or topical in how it approaches different things. So, and again, the title, it tells you that explicitly. It is a dictionary and it's of theology and exegesis. It's not that Howlott contains no theology. That would be impossible. Even if they're trying to be objective, and I think they generally are. I mean, there will always be some level of interpretation. Even the English dictionary has that. But this one is much more so. So it's not trying to hold off on that. In fact, it's trying to do that. What is not just the lexical, what's the meaning of achav, but what's the theological significance of it? So this is a great lexicon if you want to go into more kind of applied mode with your word studies. Because of that, it won't have every single word, I don't think. You'll get some kind of maybe particles or parts, you know, lesser used vocabulary that may not be treated here. But for the words that it has, it's an excellent resource to consider. All right, well, I welcome any questions or comments. I do, as you think about any other questions you might have, I do want to talk about this other way into your lexicons, which is from the biblical text. So this helps us to understand how lexicons work, to open them up on their own. But suppose you're reading the biblical text and you want to get into a lexicon. So I'm going to open up a Bible text here. Make my font bigger. I'll just go to Genesis 1:1. We'll just start there. And let's just take bara. I can hover over the word and get some information already about it, like parsing and the translation equivalent or the gloss. I can get the transliteration. So if I need the English characters, the Roman characters, I can get that. But to open bara up in a lexicon, I don't have to copy it, open a lexicon, paste it as an entry, and go from there. I can do a triple click. And many of you are longtime users. You'll be well familiar with this. But to triple click a word, 1, 2, 3, will open it up in your default lexicon, which here is Howlott. And it took me right there. And it even did a nested search. It knows that I'm triple clicking bara, and it knows that I'm triple clicking from Genesis 1:1. So it searched for bara and Genesis 1:1, which is great because I want to see what bara means everywhere, but I especially want to see if this entry treats my verse, I want to see it. And it does, it's right here. That is all enabled under settings or maybe under preferences. This will look a little different on Windows, but once you get to your settings or preferences, just go to amplify and you can change your triple click default here. Maybe you want NIDOT, that theology and exegesis one. You might come up empty more often with particular words, but you can change it here. Maybe you want Dictionary of Classical Hebrew. Whatever it's set to under Amplify, that will be your default lexicon that opens with triple click. And the way that I'm getting the scripture reference in that search is by having this checked, include reference when amplifying from text to tool, which is to say, include reference when searching a word from a text in a tool. If I had that not checked and triple clicked bara, it only searches bara. It does not also search the scripture entry. But I keep that checked almost always because you know, it's not every verse that's going to be in a lexicon. So when it is, I want to be able to see it. That's how to get in and out of one lexicon from the Bible text. and then there is the more robust option of live click. And when I select that, I get a gear icon here, and I can choose lexicon lookup. And now I'm going to single click on this word, not triple click. Single click on bara with live click enabled, and a single click will open up bara in all of my lexicons. It added the one there to get that particular meaning, that create meaning there. And so I can go through here now and see Halot, Dictionary of Classical Hebrew, BDB, and whatever else is in my library will show up here by live clicking on the word. So that's when I really want to go in depth. Maybe the triple click into Halot or Concise Dictionary or whatever is enough, but I can also live click and open it up all at once in all of my lexicons. There's a word study feature in Accordance 14 as well that allows you to do this, but live click for lexicon lookup, again, that's just right here in your right under your search entry area, and then just make sure lexicon lookup is selected, and you can look it up all at once, and then you can double click any of these open into another zone if you want to. So I might just do that and then maybe even close this, and now I've got 4 different entries to make my way through. All of the Hebrew lexicons, I just ran a search in the store, Hebrew lexicons, and shared that URL in the handout for you, but they're all linked there. I've mentioned a few, there are others. There's a question about another one. I welcome any other comments or questions you've got about lexicons, both ones that I've mentioned or ones I haven't, and also if you've got questions or comments about how to use them, how to get in and out of them, how to move from text to lexicon. I know we went kind of quickly over live click. We've got some webinars that go more in depth on that. If you go to help in webinars, you can find more about that if you want to go deeper. But I also welcome any questions before we move on to grammars. All right, let's talk about grammars. There are a good amount of grammars in Accordance, maybe the one you learned on, or maybe the one you're going to learn on, or maybe the one you're teaching from. There are a wealth of beginning and then also intermediate advanced grammars. And just as with the lexicons, I want to share, it won't be as long, but just briefly about some of the grammars, and then how do we use them. Basics of Biblical Hebrew, Pratico and Van Pelt is what I learned on. There's also Ross's introduction and some others. For intermediate and advanced, we've got Juan Muraoka and Waltke and O'Connor. Just to get a sense of what these look like, I'm going to close these out, and we'll go to Pratico. Double click that open. It will take me to my last place open. But just like with the lexicons, you can browse through here, and you're probably more likely to browse through a grammar than a lexicon, I would think, because you may just want to look at the chapters. And all of these triangles you can expand, collapse, but you can see how they organize this grammar. You'll find a similar organization in a lot of other grammars. Basics of Hebrew writing, so you need to learn the characters first. Basics of nouns and nominals, introduction to Hebrew verbs, and then one of the stems, the call stem, then the other stems. And then they have a section, it's not very long, but it's on reading and studying your Hebrew Bible. Each of these expand, and you can see what the chapters are, and then beyond that, you can see what the individual sections of the chapter are. Generally speaking, you've got some grammatical concepts introduced, defined. You'll get some rules, some irregular behaviors described. You will often get Bible verses mentioned here, maybe not right at the beginning, but as you go on. You'll have verse examples. There's also a vocabulary section at the end of this grammar, and many other grammars will have that too, so that you're not just actually learning grammar, but you're learning Hebrew. So it's called a grammar, but really it's a textbook that includes grammar and vocabulary. And here you've got the vocabulary. This one has built-in audio. So if I click on iron, for example,
iron,
turn that up so you can hear it through my microphone.
iron,
And that's Dr. Pratico reading.
boca,
This is helpful for if you're learning on your own, especially, or even just you're trying to go back and work on your pronunciation. So that's a neat added feature in this particular grammar. As with the lexicons, and this applies to all of these grammars here, you've got the different search areas to look at. The names of the search entry areas will be a little bit differently. Will be a little different just because it's a different kind of tool. But you have scripture there. So again, if I were in Genesis 12, I would just type in equals Genesis 12, and let's see if that's mentioned in here. So here's Genesis 12, 11 through 12, and that comes in part of a longer article, it looks like. You will find fewer references in introductory grammars, but more in the advanced grammars, in part because the intermediate and advanced grammars are longer, but also in part because they do more. So same thing, search field scripture equals Genesis 12, 24 hits as opposed to 2. So if you're going to a grammar looking for a particular part of scripture, you'll find more in the longer intermediate and advanced grammars, but you've got search entry areas in all of them. You could search by section, by title. Maybe you want to go right to the NIFAL. That might have to be, I think you search under titles there. Yeah, and maybe you're not sure, do they spell it with an F or a PH? Well, start typing NI and it auto completes. So there it is. That takes you right to that particular chapter. You can also search the titles here in the content sidebar. Accordance often will give you multiple ways to do the same thing, not so that you learn them all, but so that you find one way to do the thing that you need at least. All right, so other search entry areas here. You can search all the vocabulary, you can search all the English content. Maybe you want to see, do they talk about aspect at all? Well, that's a different meaning of the word aspect, but you could look for aspect here. Yeah, here's the perfect aspect. And then we've got imperfect aspect. So that's by English content. Lots of search fields that you can use to really efficiently search your grammar for the particular thing that you're looking for. It may be, though, that you're just going through it section by section, in which case you could just browse through. I mentioned Waltke and O'Connor and Juan Muraoka as more advanced, and these are advanced, like I said, not just in the sense of being longer, but they cover more territory. They go deeper with nuance on some of these things. So by definition, a first-year textbook will simplify certain things. And so in Waltke and O'Connor or Juan Muraoka, you might read things like, in first-year Hebrew, you likely learned so-and-so. That's not wrong, but here's a fuller explanation. And so those are great for going deeper with particular grammatical categories. As far as how to use grammars, similar to lexicons, we may be starting with the tool itself and using those search fields or browsing. We may also be starting from the biblical text. Just like with lexicons, we used live click to get in and out of different lexicons. Here we're going to use the info pane to get in and out of different grammars when reading the biblical text. We've got a webinar on the info pane that goes in greater detail. It's a whole hour on the info pane if you're interested in that. But let me open up a BHS here, and I'll just go to sample path. Actually, let's stay in Genesis 1:1. Make my font bigger here. All right, so I'm in Genesis 1:1, and maybe my question is, all right, I read this verse. Let's see, do my grammars treat it? And you know that you could open up a grammar and toggle the search field to scripture and type in equals Genesis 1:1. That would work fine. But if you go to add parallel, info pane, Accordance will essentially do that for you for all your grammars. So already, but before I even click on or hover over anything, this grammars section of the info pane is going to show me all of my grammars with the search field set to scripture and Genesis 1:1 searched. So if I open up, let's take Pratico and Van Pelt, for example. You can hover over it to see some initial results, but probably what you're going to want to do is click it open into a new zone, because you can see here there are 8 exact hits, and that's in Pratico and Van Pelt. So and that's a lot for any one verse in a first year textbook. So it takes me there. God created the heavens and the earth. I need to scroll up to see what's this section about, but it's talking about word order. This is reminding me that typical Hebrew word order for a verbal sentence is verb, subject, object, VSO, and they give you the very first verse as an example. Created God the heavens and the earth. So bara comes first. That's the first word. Well, you get in the beginning first, but in terms of the verb and the subject, instead of in English we say God created, but here created God. God is still the subject. The word order is just different. And you got that from the info pane. You can see what else they've got here. And then you could do the same with your other grammars. Interestingly, I've got Genesis 1:1 in a Greek grammar. I might be interested to see that. So here's some treatment of the Septuagint. That would be interesting to look at. Juan Muraoka, let me click that open. 11 hits there. And again, already here, with Pratico and Van Pelt, you've got word order. Here we're talking about disjunctive accents. So that is taking you further than you probably would go in first year Hebrew, but you can advance by hit to see everything it's got on that particular verse. And then when you're done, you can close it, and this info pane then will follow you verse to verse. If you were to go to a different book and verse altogether, if you were to go to Deuteronomy 30, for example, and start reading there, you'll have your grammars all ready for you at Deuteronomy 31. And there's only 3 listed here this time, but that's because only 3 of my grammars return positive hits, return hits for the scripture search of Deuteronomy 31. If I just hit the down arrow here, as I go down here, you can see that there's just 1 for this verse, there's none for this verse, there's none for some of these verses, 1 or 2 or more. And again, that's not that your grammar isn't showing up or that it's disappearing. It's just that if there's a hit, if and only if there's a hit for the scripture that you're searching, it will show up here in the info pane. This is much more often how I use my grammars than the first way I showed you of just searching them, although I might forget a grammatical category and need to go back and open up a grammar by itself. But I find this a more palatable way to digest grammar. I love grammar, but learning it on its own can be a challenge and it can be hard to motivate. But doing it within the context of the biblical text, I can see a little bit more what's the connection here for me to the text that I want to read, and it just helps bring it alive and gives me deeper understanding, not just of the verse that I'm looking at, but then that grammatical category. If I see verb, subject, object in Genesis 1:1, I won't be surprised when I see it again the next time. I'll be looking for it even. So that's the info pane. I've linked again here to just a search of the Accordance store for Hebrew grammars. You could see if your particular grammar that you might have learned on is available. There are a number of options there to check out. We'll pause there again and see if you've got comments or questions on using grammar textbooks in Accordance. All right. Let's move on to reading aids. And I guess a grammar and a lexicon, they already are reading aids. They help you read the text, but there are a couple of resources I just wanted to highlight that are really geared toward helping you with reading the text. Or maybe it's a grammar, as in this case, that gets you into reading much sooner. This one is called the First Hebrew Primer. I've hyperlinked to it here. I will open that in Accordance so that you can see what it looks like. This is a grammar textbook and a reader all in one. You would see this on the product page too, but you see here it notes that 30 lessons, enough to help you understand most biblical texts with a dictionary. But the goal here is to teach students to read and understand biblical Hebrew as quickly as possible. Therefore, the lessons emphasize recognition and translation, not memorization. And you might read that and think, well, isn't the goal of every Hebrew textbook to help you read and understand Hebrew, at least if it's biblical Hebrew? Yes, in a sense, but this one really orients itself around that goal more than the other ones do. So you won't get as many charts or paradigms right at the beginning to learn. In fact, I know I'm scrolling quickly, but you don't get very far. I mean, here, these are made up words in Hebrew, but you're already reading and putting letters together. And here, you're just reading actual Hebrew words out loud, even if you don't know what they mean. And here, you've even got an audio icon, so you can hear them read. So this really does make good on its promise to get you reading sooner. And I mean, here you're only in chapter 5, and look how much Hebrew text it's having you read. Now, you may not know what those words mean by chapter 5, but you'll be, well, it says read and translate, so you ought to be able to, according to this grammar. So this is a good, a good first grammar for sure, but if you've had Hebrew before and maybe you don't want to go back to your same grammar, or you want to just try something new, this is a different approach. I learned on Pratico and Van Pelt, and it was great. I've also gone back and used this one and found that it helps solidify stuff. There's obviously a lot of overlap, but it also gets you reading sooner. So this is an easier one in some ways to work your way through, just because the reading happens so much sooner. I still remember in my seminary Hebrew class, first semester, that perpetual question, when are we going to read the biblical text? Because according to the textbook, we just didn't really know enough to have that be profitable. And that, may have been true, but this grammar just tries a different approach. And so it's, well, I call it a grammar, but really First Hebrew Primer, integrated with vocabulary, reading exercises, and those audio icons in Accordance too. I'll just click on that.
Page 39, chapter 6.
You just skip ahead here.
Hi zacha davar. Hamishpacha zachra v'hi.
So it's reading through line by line. It will do that with the vocabulary as well. This does have distinct vocabulary sections in here. So the First Hebrew Primer, that's a great resource that you might consider. One other one for reading help is vocabulary oriented, but it's not a lexicon. It's called the Book by Book Guide to Biblical Hebrew Vocabulary. That's pretty inexpensive. It was put out by Hendrickson not long ago. There's one for Septuagint vocab and New Testament Greek vocab, but this basically will divide your vocabulary book by book into different lists. So first you start with high frequency Hebrew vocabulary. And this might even mirror what's in your textbooks, which will be broken up by chapter, but here's a full-on list, words that occur, X number of times to X number of times. So the idea is that you learn those lists, or maybe you already know these words, and then when you move to reading a particular book, and that's why I call this a reading aid. Maybe you say, I'm going to set out to read Genesis now over the next 100 days. It's 50 chapters, so I'm going to give myself 2 days per chapter. Having looked at that high frequency list, now it gives you lists that are 43 to 15 times in Genesis. So ochel for food occurs 43 to 15 times in that book. So that's going to be a word I would want to know before reading. So maybe I start with the high frequency lists and then work my way down. Here's 15 to 12, and so on, all the way down to words that occur only 3 times. That's taking the frequency based approach to vocabulary, which is pretty common in the textbooks. The idea being, if you learn X number of words, you know 80% of the Hebrew Bible or something like that. And then, you know, you'd still have to look up the other ones. But the Guide to Hebrew Vocab puts them all together in lists for you. Let me just pause there because I see a question going back to grammars. I will end the time talking about the count command, but I also welcome any comments or questions that you've got. Here's the question that just came in. I'm going to put it in the chat, those of you here live, so you can see what I'm responding to, but I'll read it out loud. Somebody said, when you select a word in the Hebrew text, then click on the grammar in the info pane and get multiple hits, how do you navigate in the grammar from the first hit to the next one, etc.? Let me see if I answer your question, and if I don't, please let me know. But let's take the word Deuteronomy 30:14. So we'll just take that at parallel info pane and Juan Muraoka. Let's click that open. No, that didn't give me multiple hits. Well, let's go to Genesis 1:1 because we know that has multiple hits. All right, let's try again. Juan Muraoka. All right, 11 hits. The hit button will show right here. And you'll need to maybe scroll up sometimes because you're advancing by hit and it's doing what you're telling it to do, which is showing you the next hit. But I don't know what this is number 2 in the list of. So you'll need to scroll up and then advance down by hit again to get to the next one. You can also open up the content sidebar here, which will show you where in the grammar textbook you are as you look at each hit. And this will be open in a separate zone, so you can do that. But that's it. And let me know if that wasn't your question. But with the info pane, advance by hit. Okay, great. I'm going to spend the last few minutes on the count command. But again, if you've got questions or comments, I will prioritize those. We looked at this book by book guide to biblical Hebrew vocabulary, and you can essentially do your own version of that. You know, this is already done and well organized, and I mean, I think it's maybe worth it sometimes to have a ready-made tool like that. But if you're taking the approach of learning high frequency vocabulary, so starting there, you can look at those words in context. This takes you even further than something like a bunch of lists will do. So if I've got a text open, and let's say I want to just start reading through Genesis or whatever the book is, and I want to see all the words that occur 100 times or more. And when I see those shown in my text, those will be my words that maybe I learned those over the last 2 months. And so I want to see them highlighted in the text. Go to words, the search entry area. Now you use a command for this, a search command, which you can access by right-clicking, enter command, and then you go to count. You'll also see a keyboard shortcut you can use. You can also go to search, enter command, count. You can also start typing count, C-O-U-N-T. Now I'm typing Hebrew because I set a Hebrew text to words, but I typed C-O and it knows that, so it gives it to me in a quick entry. Then you get a question, what count are you looking for? I want to find words that occur 100 times or more. What I don't want to search is count 100, because what that will do is give me all of the words that occur 100 times, and that's it. Not words that occur 101 times or 99 times, just all the words that occur 100 times. Okay, well, that might be an interesting trivia question, but I want words that occur 100 times or more. Just going to add a plus. So count 100 plus. And count is kind of a funny name for a command. I mean, it is counting, I guess, but think of it as word count. So find all the words with a word count of 100 times or more. Now you can see here a lot in bold and red. That's how my hit results return. And that's good. If I've learned this much vocabulary, and these are the words that I think, I should know these, that's encouraging. I'm seeing a lot of red here in Genesis 1. And so I've got Elohim, I've got 8, I've got Hashamayim, and others that occur 100 times or more. I could do the flip side of that. I could do 100 minus, or I suppose 99 minus. So words that occur 99 times or fewer. It's basically going to do the inverse and switch the colors here. This is another way to think about approaching a text, that it's going to show me words that occur 99 times or fewer. Now that's what's in bold and red. And so maybe what I say is, all right, anytime a word is in black font or whatever I've set my search or my text to, I'm not going to look at the instant details for that, at least not initially. But with bara, that occurs 99 times or fewer. So yeah, we'll look that one up. Reshit, we'll look that one up, and so on. So that count command is worth playing with. Do note that here, for example, I've got Genesis 1:1, Genesis 1:2, and Genesis 1:4. Where is Genesis 1:3? Well, this is not a mistake. It means that Genesis 1:3 does not have any words that occur 99 times or fewer, which is really good news if my goal is to read with my knowledge of 100 plus. So how do I see it? Well, this context slider here gives you more context for your search. This search is just giving me hit verses. 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It'll have a lot of them, but you will find verses that don't show up here. In other words, there will be verses that do not have words that occur 99 times or fewer. Maybe not many, but Genesis 1:3 is one of them. So if my goal is to read through the text, and my reading aid here is this count command, I'm going to want to toggle this all the way to A. And now I've got Genesis 1:3 showing here. Vayomer Elohim, Vahior, Vahior, all in black, all words that occur 100 times or more because they did not show up in this search. And again, that's an encouragement if this is the method that I'm using to learn vocabulary and read through the biblical text. That's the count command. There's more still that you can do with it, so I welcome any questions or comments, but that's the basic kind of simple version. Go to your search entry area, do one of those methods to get to your commands, go to count, and then just pick what you're doing. And maybe next time it's 50 times and fewer that you want to see highlighted, and then you're going to challenge yourself to not look up the rest, at least not initially. This is one of the rare operations in accordance that may take more than a half second, but even so, it returns the results pretty quickly. And again, remember, here now with 50 and fewer, 1:3 and 1:5 are not showing. So just remember that context slider if what you want to see is all of the text, and it will still preserve your hits. So to recap, we have talked about Hebrew lexicons in accordance, both how to use them on their own and how to use them from a biblical text. We talked about Hebrew grammar textbooks in accordance, and again, how to use them on their own, and also via the info pane, how to use them in an integrated way with the text. And then I highlighted a few Hebrew reading aids, as well as the count command at the end. I would love to take any other questions or comments you've got. We've got just a moment or two. And I also want to mention, as you're thinking about any questions that you may have, that we did a Greek lexicons, grammars, and reading aids, Hebrew lexicons, grammars, and reading aids. Next one will be Septuagint lexicons, grammars, and reading aids. There is not as much available in all three of these categories for the Septuagint, but there is enough that I'm going to do a webinar on it. So that will be not the same Greek resources that we did. I know the first one was called Greek lexicons, grammars, and reading aids, but that was generally New Testament oriented. We'll do one on the Septuagint next week. I'm going to stop the recording, and then I'll stay on for just a few last minute logistics for those of you here live. But if you are watching, again, on a recording, abramkj@accordancebible.com, and I'd be happy to pass on this handout to you.